Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
I don't even have to say anything to get you to laugh.
Marcus, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
Are you a turkey maker or a turkey taker?
Well, based on my success over a lifetime of hunting, I would say that I'm definitely a turkey maker because I have not been that successful.
I feel the same way. More of them definitely get away than get a truck ride home.
Yeah. Well, we've also put in a lot of time over our life and our careers, both in the woods, trying to make things better, but also trying to teach as many people as we can, trying to learn as much as we can to teach people that. So I certainly think I've netted more turkeys than I've taken.
Yeah. And people tell us that they appreciate those efforts from us, but I think it's important that they know that there's things they can do as well.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the impetus for this episode is, what can the average person that doesn't have a career in research or outreach or something like that, or resource management, what can people do to be advocates for the resource? I think that's an important discussion. And, I think folks are, some people feel like they're helpless and they aren't.
Yeah.
There are actions that people can take to become an advocate and try to, to help produce more turkeys than they're taking from one aspect or another, whether you own land or not, there are things that can be done.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that came to mind for me as far as, how people can, shift to, we're not asking anybody to quit taking turkeys. Obviously, we wouldn't have this podcast if we weren't taking turkeys. That's what it's all about. But
we're just trying to shift the needle so that you're netting more than you take. If everybody was doing that, turkeys would be doing pretty darn good.
And I think, some of the lowest hanging fruit in that regard, so that people can start becoming more of a turkey advocate, if you will, is to just make sure that you're doing everything that you can to help the state that you hunt or you live in, or multiple states that you hunt in for people that travel and turkey hunt. Make sure you're buying those licenses, you're following all the reporting laws, doing game check or whatever else it is, whatever the system is called in your particular state. And then also, we've talked to a lot of state turkey coordinators that have laid out how you can participate in helping them collect information on turkey recruitment. Those are some of the boxes that you can check right off the bat that help turkey populations at a scale that's beyond just what you can impact.
Right. I think that's important, that we have regulations in place, make sure that you're following those. They're designed to protect the resource and make it sustainable. Making sure that you're participating in opportunities to provide data. Like you're saying, there's often hunter harvest surveys, there are poll per hen surveys, there are lots of different things. And depending on what state you're listening from, there may be a different suite from those options available to you specifically. But that's where a lot of the data that comes from that decisions are made on.
Right.
And it's only as good as the folks that provide it, so that's an easy way for folks to contribute, is to participate in those surveys and, abide by the regulations that have been set.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's certainly a low-hanging fruit, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the entry level. What's the next step up from the entry level, you think?
Well, I think a lot of folks are doing it right now if they're listening to us.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think is pretty important and probably often overlooked as a key element here is to get not as knowledgeable, seek out knowledge, try to learn, try to become as knowledgeable about what things are affecting the resource and what you can do or what you can advocate for to positively influence the resource. So
Right.
listening to this podcast is one way that folks that are listening right now are doing that, but there's other opportunities to do it. You and I are about to offer an intensive training that people could sign up for. That's another example. We can link that in the show notes.
Yeah.
There's learn and burn opportunities coming up all over the place. We're about to share on social media, all of them, all the links that we could find to link people directly to that. I think those things are pretty important for people to get knowledgeable, whether you're managing resources on your land or you're encouraging or supporting state agencies and their efforts on public lands. There's lots of different ways that being knowledgeable about what's wrong and what needs to be done.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned that training that we have upcoming, and I know a lot of states are starting to do that as well. So state wildlife agencies are offering turkey management workshops for landowners and really just
Sure.
anyone else who's interested. To that point, though, I feel like there's a lot of people out there that'll say, well, really, what's the point in me, learning more about turkey management, particularly from a habitat standpoint, because I don't control the land where I hunt. You feel like you hear that a
Yeah.
lot too?
Oh yeah. What do you think? What why do they need to know?
Well, I think that there's, probably more opportunity than some of those folks realize to benefit turkeys. And certainly there are things that they can do, but there's also things that they can avoid doing that would be damaging potentially to turkey populations. And I think that that's another way to be an advocate. So even on leased land or on permission pieces where people hunt, we have a whole episode devoted to what people might be able to do. It was back.
Yeah,
I don't know the
on leased
exact
land.
episode number. We can lease it, or we can link it in the show notes.
We'll lease you the
We'll
episode.
lease it. We'll lease that information to
It'll
you.
be real cheap.
But we can add that episode link in the show notes. Please, Charlotte. Thank you very much. But
It just magically appeared.
But like one example might be, on leased land, a lot of times hunters still have food plots. Well, let's just shift up our management of those food plots a little bit so that they're more turkey friendly during the summertime. That would be an example.
That's one that I work with a lot of landowners to do, is just tweaking the way that they are managing their food plots. And it's often not that much of a change, but it's what I deal with most commonly, you already know what I'm going to say probably, is killing ryegrass.
Yeah.
A lot of fields in the deep south are infested with it.
Yeah.
And people haven't, it really isn't becoming evident until after deer season's over, and it's really not an obvious problem for their deer hunting.
And people oftentimes never see it if they're not out there in, late spring.
Yeah.
When it becomes so obvious.
Right. But then you get around to turkey brooding time, and it's a big problem.
Right.
Like it's making in many cases, I see it time and time again, it's making the field unusable.
Right.
And you can take a couple of steps, which we've outlined in some of our episodes, to control and get rid of that ryegrass. I mean, it's really not that difficult to get rid of.
Right. Yeah. I would say also, in addition to that, there are some leased properties where they'll allow you to do some roadside vegetation management, or maybe like if it's, pine plantation, there's some openings throughout the plantation, like in take rows or skidder trails or loading decks, and all those areas you can do some vegetation management for turkeys. We've talked about various ways to do that with and without prescribed fire. So if fire is an option, great, but if it's not, there's other things that you can still do. Feeding is a big one, obviously, that we're always going to get back to, especially make sure you're not feeding during those warmer, humid times of the year where aflatoxin's more likely to grow. But then also, make sure that you're not feeding so much and over such a long duration that you're potentially supplementing populations of animals that have negative implications for turkeys. So there's the obvious raccoons, as a nest predator from that perspective. But then in addition to that, like, are we supplementing wild pigs and keeping wild pigs around, which are obviously a disturbance and a food competitor to turkeys?
Yeah, there's good points. Or just turn it off.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of folks that I work with that just turned them off and they didn't see any negatives.
Yeah.
Now they're really glad they did it.
Yeah.
So another thing that comes to mind for me in terms of being an advocate, we've got quite a few really good organizations now. Turkeys for Tomorrow, National Wild Turkey Federation are two obvious ones for turkeys.
Yep.
Being a member, being engaged, that they often have events within your state, and sometimes that's even out in the field doing things on behalf of turkeys. I think we need to have an episode actually on this on here, just on this specific thing. But in Florida, we have a really super impactful program. I'd say it's been going on since the mid '90s, called the Call Show program.
Yeah.
Right, and it's the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission and the Forest Service and the state are partnering with the state chapter of the NWTF to match funds that they put into managing habitat and restoring habitat for wild turkeys on lands that are open access for hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like that's a pretty exceptional way to give back. Not only are people giving back through multiple parts of that process, but it's also going directly into funding work on land that's improving habitat for turkeys. I mean, that's another cool example. But getting involved in, some of these conservation organizations, I think, is a pretty important part of this.
Yeah, and there was something that you said that that made me think about something I wouldn't have otherwise, but it's that, there's the obvious turkey-centric conservation organizations like TFT and NWTF, but then even beyond that, there are some other conservation organizations, for example, like Ducks Unlimited and Quail Forever, and maybe even like the NDA, the National Deer Association, all of which, they advocate for conservation generally, and then specifically they advocate for sound, scientific management of wildlife populations and their habitats, or they fund technical assistance biologists in different states that can go help landowners and provide them with services. So all of those contribute to turkey habitat in some way, even if that's not their primary mission.
Well, even the lobbying,
right,
for turkeys and influencing policies like
and conservation funding, they lobby for that as well.
Yeah, I mean that was one thing that happened here in Florida is that resulted in the funding that we have for the turkey research.
Mm-hmm.
Is that there was a strong interest from legislators and a strong interest across many conservation organizations that were behind it.
Yeah.
And that, now we have a budget where we can operate at a level we need to understand turkey populations and what the path forward is.
Right.
So, another thing while we're on this, a lot of people probably listen to us and don't even know, but we have, if you want to directly help with research, we have foundations accounts set up where people can donate directly. We've gotten a number of donations from people, and we use that to supplement research projects, to help us disseminate information through various aspects. Like, that's another way that people can contribute, and it's all going back to our efforts to learn more and disseminate more information to more people.
Right.
So another important way.
Another big one that I feel like you and I have been talking about a lot more frequently in the recent past is recruiting new turkey hunters.
That was the next one I was going to get to.
I figured it was, and so I'm just going to set you up and let you go as far as talking about some of that information you've recently shared with me about, how we're doing as far as a turkey hunting community in terms of, ensuring the future of this I don't want to call it a sport, but really kind of a passion and a lifestyle in some senses.
It's certainly a passion and lifestyle. It's part of people's culture.
Absolutely.
Like it is part of the culture I grew up in.
Yeah. And this is kind of just an aside thing, but a lot of times we're asked, one of the basics of setting up a peer-reviewed journal article is providing some background and justification. And one of the things that we almost always do, right, when the article is focused on a game species is we talk about the economic impact of that game species. But over the past several years, I've increasingly encouraged students in my lab to not just talk about the economic impact of a species because, right, if you just have that justification, if you have something else that comes along that's more profitable, then you've lost it, right? And so I increasingly ask students to emphasize the cultural justification for making sure that we can serve turkeys, and making sure that we still have that around because of all those tangential benefits, like some of which we just talked about. It encourages, better conservation for all species of wildlife through manipulating to increase the quality of their habitats, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent points. Related to, in this whole conversation, I mean, we're talking to an audience full of passionate people that love turkey hunting. And some of our more recent work, that we're putting together right now suggests that we're losing that.
Yeah.
At a rate that I'm uncomfortable with personally. And I think, you were kind of saying you were setting this up. That's something that I think is very important for us to put in clear focus here is that the turkey hunting community is losing traction. There's several lines of evidence to suggest we're actually decreasing the number of turkey hunters, and we are not recruiting them as fast as basically any other game species that we've looked at. We're not recruiting new turkey hunters. We're not recruiting them as early in life. Mm-hmm. And we could talk about, I think we're planning when this paper comes out to have the lead author, Zach Steele from my lab on to talk about this. But, this is another way to give back, not only trying to instill it in your own family and your own children, relatives, but also, for example, the NWTF chapter here, the local chapter has a what do they call it? Like a youth weekend, mm-hmm. where a bunch of folks, seasoned hunters have volunteered to go out and mentor a youth hunter, mm-hmm. on their first turkey hunt.
Yeah.
Actually, the event that we scheduled, you and I scheduled in Alabama that we were talking about, we'll link in the show notes for people, overlaps the same day that. So I'm not going to get to do that particular event this year, but like that's the sort of thing where.
But we're still going to be teaching new turkey hunters.
Yeah, that we're doing it in a different way in that event in Alabama.
Right.
But that was the first thing when I got invited to come and be a mentor. I was like, I'm all in. What date? And I was like, man, I can't do that day. So, but then they have a women's hunt that's structured similarly, and I signed up for that. No questions asked. I'm in. Mm-hmm. And I blocked off those dates, and those are the kinds of things that I feel really strongly now, and I'm really starting to appreciate more and more, is how important it is to try to provide those opportunities for people that don't have family, that,
right.
That can provide that opportunity, or they don't have access, or, various things that could limit opportunity or recruitment. So, I guess that would be a challenge to folks to think about ways that you can contribute in that way, even if it's just, going to a class of third graders and getting them excited about how awesome all these things are. Like there's lots of ways that people could do this.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I think advocating for the next generation is a pretty critical one, because the turkey hunting community is aging pretty fast.
Yeah, well, let's put this into context for some people, because we've talked about how bad the situation is, but what are some of the most alarming stats that you've recently uncovered regarding
I
turkey
don't
hunter
know this.
recruitment and retention?
I don't know this. I can't give you specific numbers, but
Yeah, generalities are fine.
they're the things that stuck out to me, and they're going to be. I know that there are people out here that are going to be irritated with what I'm about to say because they argue with me about this commonly. One of the national surveys that was specifically focused on turkeys and trying to understand how many turkey hunters there were. The last iteration that we had of it was in the 2012 to 16 range. I think it was that 5-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And the loss of turkey hunters, like net how many there are,
Yeah,
was that there was a substantial loss.
yeah,
And I think some states are tracking data like this, and that's probably continuing.
mm-hmm.
More contemporary. It wasn't just a decade ago; it's still happening.
Yeah,
And that was one thing that stuck out to me. Another thing that we can really unpack when we get Zach on here, when we started looking over time, and this goes all the way back to the early 80s, maybe even the late 70s, just looking at data points on what the average age of hunters was for the turkey hunting community and how that's changed over time. The turkey hunting community has aged substantially.
yeah,
So the average age of a hunter in the community is much older now, and the rate at which it increased is much steeper than it was for deer.
yeah,
And now I can't remember. We had pretty good data to kind of compare to a few other species. Deer were the main ones.
mm-hmm.
But that suggests that recruitment is not very good.
Mm-hmm.
Retention, at least of the OG turkey hunters, seems to have been pretty good.
Yeah,
But recruitment of new hunters, especially young in life, was about I think it was as poor or the most poor with the turkey hunting community compared to all other game species that we could find data on.
yeah,
So those, that's why I've really gotten onto this now after seeing that.
That's
And
interesting.
we're about to present this at the convention to the turkey committee, just kind of show folks what we've uncovered on this. So, I think this is something that will be a good discussion among the coordinators to talk about, and the NWTF staff at the convention as well. They'll be in the room. So, I know there are lots of folks and a lot of organizations and groups that are trying to tackle this in various ways, and I think it's really needed in the turkey hunting community. And it's actually Zach. I think I told this. He's a new hunter. I could get him on a deer hunt right now. You know what? There's several people that I could think of. Yep, they'll put him on a deer. There's no question.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
But trying to get him on turkey.
Yep.
Completely different thing.
I've had the same experience with my kids and my wife. Like, getting them into turkey hunting is a lot more difficult than deer hunting.
Yeah. It's hard
Absolutely.
to find a place to turkey hunt, and it's hard to get landowners that have turkeys to support that.
Yeah, people don't want to give up turkeys as easily as they do deer, and I don't blame them.
Yeah, I don't blame them either. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I understand completely. But I also understand the point of view that those folks that are screaming at the mic, at the speaker right now, we can't hear you, but I know what you're saying, because I talked to plenty of folks that have this point of view. They don't want more hunters.
Yeah.
They already don't.
I know.
Their hunting experience is has declined because of the competition on public land, or
Yeah.
like I hear that and I understand it. I also have experienced it because I do a lot of turkey hunting on public land myself.
Right.
I understand, but we're in a situation where I don't know where we're going.
There's got to be a balance there, though, right? Because
Yeah,
on the one hand, they're right. The more hunters we recruit, the more competition there is, certainly.
yeah,
But also, if we don't recruit any hunters, then we lose, our quorum, so to speak. Our political capital would be a better term for that. So, our political capital to not only advocate for sound, scientific turkey management at the state level or whatever level you're concerned with, and as far as policy issues are concerned, but then also, we lose that general support, for the sport as we move forward. And I think that that's something that's critical too. Is overall we're seeing this trend that a smaller and smaller percentage of the American population are hunters of any kind.
yeah,
So, there's a trade-off there where, yeah, I understand not wanting more competition, but we also don't want to prevent an increase in competition at the cost of losing hunting rights or losing, sound scientific management of this game species that we love, because we don't have the voice anymore as hunters. So I think that that's something that's really important.
yeah. Another thing, let me add to that real
Yeah.
quick. Another aspect of that I don't think is talked about enough, but I'm really concerned about is, and you could probably relate to this, and I know some of our listeners can because you're either this person or you work with a lot of people that are this person. There are a lot of folks that are going through extraordinary measures to manage their land and make sure that it's good for turkeys and that it stays that way for a long time. And if we lose that interest in, that focus, that dedication, and sometimes they're losing money, a substantial amount of money through all this effort that they're putting into that land management that's, ultimately benefiting turkeys. And I'm nervous about losing that passion and enthusiasm across landowners to maintain that focus because we've talked about it a ton on this, the habitat loss, fragmentation, habitat quality declining. Like that's a major concern that we're really worried about. And, the only places that I see that are really, really well done on private land are from people that are really engaged in hunting.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of cases those are our few holdouts, or our turkey production factories across the landscape that are keeping this thing going.
Yeah.
And it's uncomfortable to say and think about, but I also recognize, because I've heard this from some of those folks, that we need to be careful also with regulations, even when we're trying to benefit populations, because if we restrict things too much, we're unintentionally disincentivizing those people from putting all the time, effort, and energy that they are into those properties. I'm not saying we don't need to make changes, but we just need to be cognizant of
Yeah.
what may happen indirectly as a result of that. But I'm also glad that you brought up that point, because it's important for these organizations like TFT to lead the way in terms of, things like hunter recruitment, retention, reactivation, and state agencies are doing that as well. And it's important for those same groups to advocate for habitat conservation for the species. But where do the hunters actually get recruited, and where does the habitat management for turkeys actually occur? It happens, by individual hunters being willing to participate in those recruitment events, and it happens through individual landowners managing their land. So this is something that, yes, absolutely, conservation organizations should be leading the way on by example, but these are changes that are up to us as turkey hunters to really have a meaningful impact at scale on. And
Yeah.
so, I think, one way that we should think about it, is at a minimum, as turkey hunters, we should be replacing ourselves, right? So ideally, you at least recruit one person who's going to be a lifelong turkey hunter, lifelong turkey advocate, and even better than that, because we're in negative growth right now. We need to we're going to have to overcome that by achieving some positive growth through some people. So let's try to recruit 2 or 3 hunters
We
each.
need 2 poults per hen.
That's right.
Or gobbler.
There you go. That's the way to look at it. We need at least 2 poults per hen.
Yeah.
2 poults per hunter.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, that's good. No, I agree. And, when you were talking about that, I couldn't help but think about another thing. A lot of folks, well, I'll say it this way. All of us have a lot to learn, right? We always have a lot to learn. And I just think about, those landowners making sure that you're trying to learn as much as you can to do things as well as you can and as efficiently as you can.
Yeah.
But also think
make sure you're putting effort in the right places.
Yeah. And then also trying to showcase that effort, not necessarily by letting all your neighbors come hunt on you, but like if you're the turkey factory and others are seeing what you're doing, then they're more likely to go start trying it.
Yeah.
So I think
that's leading by example too.
Yeah. And doing that on public land, I think, is another good thing that agencies and nonprofits can do, is have demonstration areas, available that are doing well, and you've got a lot of public engagement. But I think about some of these landowners that have, that are participating in these youth events. They're letting some kid they don't know come out there with often some other hunter that they don't know as a mentor.
Yeah.
And then they're getting to experience that on their land and see how things are done. And then who knows where that kid's going to end up, They might be a landowner down the road, and they're going to remember that experience, which often is a life-changing experience for kids at that age.
Absolutely.
They're going to remember that, and then, it carries over.
Yeah. And I think in some cases it's just as important to potentially have the parent come along on that hunt too, because, the parent is the one that has the resources and the ability to take the kid hunting, right? A kid can't drive. A kid can't, purchase their gun and ammunition and all that kind of stuff. So you got to have an adult involved as well. So it's not, I think it's great to focus our recruitment efforts on kids, but I think we don't need to necessarily forget about adults as well, because they're the ones that are going to have the resources to actually hunt or take a kid.
Yeah. Good point.
How else can we be a turkey advocate, Marcus?
I was about to ask you the same question.
I'm glad I got it out first then.
Well, something that I have certainly tried to do a lot, I try to get information out to as many people as I can. I know that you're doing the same thing. Trying to paint a positive image of the turkey hunting community in particular. Something I spend a lot of time thinking about and curating content to do, trying to make sure that I try not to elevate things that sometimes are shared online, on social media or something that I think paints a negative viewpoint, especially when they're inaccurate also.
Or if they're just unnecessarily divisive sometimes.
Yeah. And, some of the social media platforms feed off of that. Like, you don't get traction unless it's, intentionally divisive. And I don't think that's a good strategy personally. And I think that's something easy for folks to think about, especially if you have a large audience, trying to be cognizant of, the fact that there's an opportunity there to paint a positive image of what we're doing and what we're all about, and conservation in general, that sentiment within the hunting community. And I don't think that it's always portrayed. And sometimes that opportunity is lost, or it goes the opposite way, and it actually becomes a uh, negative interaction on that
Mm-hmm.
front.
Yeah. So do you have an example in mind of what you're thinking about that people do that could result in that negative perception?
Well, I think we can probably think of some examples uh, from different things with hunting. Maybe trying to be intentionally controversial with the method of hunting, or
Yeah.
showing it in a grueling light,
Yeah.
that might be perceived by a non-hunter negatively because of that. Uh, I've seen that with predator removal before,
Yeah.
where
Or like the
it was
slow motion
painting.
video of a gobbler's head getting shot off.
Yeah, like things like that, being cognizant that it's not just your buddies that also hunt
Yeah.
viewing it.
Yeah.
And I think it's becoming more and more important as we get more and more uh, able to extend that message farther, and we're simultaneously shifting, in terms of just the general population. We're kind of shifting away from folks being hunters and even being accepting of hunting.
Right. Yeah.
So being, trying to understand that, I think about that really often.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. We're definitely shooting ourselves in the foot with with some of the content that we put out there and the way that the non-hunting public perceives that.
Yeah. When often that's what gets elevated by the algorithm,
Yeah.
like it's the more controversial it is and the more it irritates people, the farther it goes, which then perpetuates that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do think that's unfortunate. And then we have something really good to share that would be super positive all the way around, in terms of the resource, and that just flops.
Yeah.
Like, it's so maddening.
Well, that's the only thing I can think of right now, or all the things I can think of right now from turkey advocacy standpoint. But I did I did recruit a new hunter this week
I know.
to the
I need to
ranks.
hear some. I need to
Not
hear about it.
not a turkey hunter, but we got to start
Well,
somewhere.
yeah,
And I got my daughter in her first deer this weekend, or this
that
past weekend.
yeah. When you sent me that image, like I just it made me feel warm, and
Yeah,
I think I just was like I know, like I could feel
yeah.
how you felt.
I'm
And I
telling
was
you,
really proud to see it.
it was absolutely surreal. So we went down to Southeast Alabama to a friend of ours' property, and they were so gracious to extend their hospitality and have the whole family down. My kids can be a little crazy and wired sometimes, like most kids. Um,
No, I don't know anything about that.
but yeah, we went out. We got there the night before, and we went out the next morning. Didn't get out there, well before daylight or anything like that. I was, taking my daughter. She's 9, about to turn 10, and we practiced. We'd been practicing some with rifles towards the end of summer, early fall, and she was shooting really well. And she'd been telling me, for the past couple of years that she was ready to go ahead and take a deer. And I guess I should have given that background before I started telling the hunt story. But but yeah, she's been saying that she was ready for the past couple of years, but I didn't really feel comfortable, letting her take it on till this year. Like I said, she turned 9, and I think every kid's ready at a different age, right?
Yeah.
And I also, it was important to me. I don't know how many people agree with me, and that's fine. It was important to me that she understood, what it meant to take a life, when we
Uh,
went into it. And I think, for her, she's gotten to that point where she understands the seriousness of it. So, anyways, we were all ready for it. We got down there, stayed the night, got up the next morning, didn't want to get up, with her super early. And so we got up like 6 o'clock or whatever, and got out there as the sun was getting up really good. Luckily, we were, really close to where we were hunting, so we were still pretty early. And we get in the stand, and I'm still kind of getting situated. I brought all kinds of snacks, and we've got, drinks, and we've got the hot hands because it was freezing cold, and I wanted her to be comfortable and to enjoy herself and have a good time. And where we were hunting, we could look out across a pretty large, about 30-acre area, most of it field. And I mean, you know how it is. It's like most of the time you sit in a place like that, you're scanning far, right?
Mhm.
You're looking at the edge of the field, at the wood lines all the way around. And the landowner had told us that even if the deer come out far where we were sitting, that oftentimes they work their way in close to where we're hunting,
Mhm.
because obviously, with this being her first for her first real hunt, I wanted to set her up for success and have a really easy, relatively close shot. And so I'm getting all this stuff out, getting situated and everything like that, and occasionally scanning the distant wood line. And next thing I know, I hear, "Dad, there's a deer! Dad, there's a deer right there!" And I look at her to see where she's looking, and sure enough, not much more than 50 yards right in front of us, these two does just walk out of the wood line, like right there.
Yeah.
And we were in a shooting house, like an enclosed blind, but it had windows that were open. And
Mhm.
immediately I'm just shushing her, like, "Oh my God, you gotta be quiet," because she's like, "There's a deer." And so we, so I'm just like, just freeze, just wait. They look relaxed. Let's give them time. And so we already have her gun set up, and she's got a nice shooting rest and everything like that. And the deer feed on out in front of us. And like I said, they're still relaxed. And I go ahead and I pick out. There were, it looked like it was a mature doe with last year's fawn, now a yearling, or like now a 1.5-year-old doe. And so I'm fine with her shooting either one. But
Mhm.
since they're both right in front of us, equidistant, I'm like, go ahead and take the bigger deer. And this was also a property that needs, some population maintenance or reduction. And so she gets on the gun, and I said, just go ahead and get the deer in your sights. And I'm trying to take this one step at a time, kind of coach her through it. And she's handling it like a pro. Like after the initial excitement of seeing the deer, she kind of settles in, and she's like, "I got her in my sights." And by the time she gets her in her sights, she's quartering towards us really hard.
Mhm.
And meanwhile, the 1.5-year-old, the younger doe, is still perfectly broadside. So I'm like, okay, well, let's just go ahead. Can you shift your gun back over to this other deer? Because it wasn't that far to her side.
Mhm.
And so she starts swinging the deer over to the other smaller doe. And by the time she gets the deer or the gun swung over there, this deer is quartering away from us now. And so,
Classic.
yeah, and so she takes her head off the gun, and she said, "Well, Dad, I don't have a shot at this one either now." And so the bigger doe again turns broadside, and she's like, "I'm just going to shoot the bigger one." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, you do it, babe." Swing it back over there. So she swings the gun back over, and I'm like, "Okay, once you get the gun over there, I'm going to go ahead and take the safety off, but I don't want you, getting your hand near the trigger until you've got the gun really steady and stable." And we talked about, as
Mhm.
we'd practice, making sure you have a good shot, because there's nothing you're going to regret worse than, taking a shot that you weren't ready for, prepared for, and making a mistake.
Mhm.
So she swings it over there. She gets on the deer. She settles in. And I'm like, "Well, you remember, the point of aim and everything like that?" She's like, "I got it, Dad. I got it." And we took the safety off, and I just sat back. And that was honestly the most difficult part of the hunt for me, where I'm sitting across from her, and although she's right there, she's sitting there with a center fire rifle with the safety off, with her finger on the trigger, about to, take an animal's life, which I'm perfectly obviously okay with, but it's still
Mhm.
it's
Nerve
heavy.
wracking.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
It's a heavy moment. And so I'm probably breathing harder than she is at this point. But I watch the deer pull up my binoculars. She breaks the shot. I see the bullet impact. It's a perfect shot right where she was aiming.
Mhm.
And then the deer runs directly towards us from the shot. she kicks, she runs directly towards us, and I've only ever had this happen a few times and never as loud as it was for this hunt. And maybe it was because, I was just so amped because, it's my daughter's first deer, but I can hear the deer running, just galloping. I hear the feet hitting as she comes towards us, and then I just hear crash right at the base of the stand. And
when you sent me the image,
yeah,
I mean, it was literally, we could probably cut this in on YouTube for folks so you can see it. The image is basically like straight down out of the stand.
I could barely see the deer out of the window of the shooting house because it was so close to the base. Yeah, like I had to stand up and look down out of the window at an angle to see the deer.
I thought when you sent me that, you had already told me that y'all were going to do this, and I figured if I got a picture, this was going to be, her first deer.
Yeah.
But you sent me that image, and I was like, oh, they must have shot one and drug it up to the house and got back in there, and they're just hunting more deer. I didn't know what was the context was, but then we got into text chain, with several other folks, and it became evident that that's where the deer ran to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when I sent it to the landowner too. He was like, how did y'all already drag it back out of the field that fast? And I said, no, that's where it expired.
What a crazy.
It was like 10 feet probably from the base of the stand. And like I said, it was a perfect shot. And she was just absolutely over the moon. And for the next, 2 or 3 days, she was like, Dad, I can't believe I shot a deer. I'm a deer hunter now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was the coolest thing.
Yeah. I can remember that. I mean, that was super impactful on me, and I always reflect on that, thinking about this situation, like that's, that's going to be one of those special things that y'all have together for life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely going to be a lifelong memory for sure.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad that y'all got it done, and she was super excited about it, and happy for y'all.
And that it worked out just right from the script. I know that there's no way the rest of her hunting career will always be like that, but at least this one was.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it was all the way around a really positive experience. And,
we got back to the cabin with the deer, and my wife was just getting up, and because she was still back at the cabin with my son, and she was making her coffee, and she said she was like she heard this little like high pitched voice, and she wasn't sure what it was, like if the TV was on or somebody was on the phone or whatever in another room, and because it was only like, I don't know, 7:30 or 7:45. So she knew it couldn't be us getting back from hunting yet. And then I popped my head in the door and I was like, hey, you're going to come out here? And she did. And it was funny because I didn't even suggest to my daughter that she do this, but she tricked Mom and told her that she got nervous and couldn't shoot. So I'd shot the deer. And so Mom's like, oh, okay, well, that's great. Dad shot a deer, whatever. Yeah. And then she was like, I'm just kidding. I shot it. It's fine. I got my deer. And then, of course, everybody's just jumping up and down and having a good time.
Yeah. That's awesome. That reminds me, I got to capture this, I have a video of it, but I took my oldest daughter is a little bit younger than yours, for those out there that don't know. She's just turned 8. But and she's not quite ready for the hunting yet. But I took her to a catfish pond this summer. I think I probably told you about this, but she ended up catching this huge catfish. Yeah, it's like several pounds. And for her, it's just this enormous thing. But I filmed her reeling it in, and the excitement and everything. I know, it's a similar kind of thing where I know that made a big imprint on her.
Yeah.
And, we are sharing that memory together, and I was able to document it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds like you guys have to really have that kind of, fellowship among the family over this, to celebrate it together. That's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sharing it with family and friends is the best part about it all. You know? I was trying to think of what else, if there's anything else we needed to cover. I guess, we mentioned that we're going to be having that event coming up. I didn't know if you wanted to provide a little bit more detail on that, if we have a few more minutes.
Yeah, I actually was going to ask you to, because I talked about it a little bit. You want to talk about what we're going to cover in it? I mean,
sure. So
just for folks out there, we've been getting tons of feedback asking us for training opportunities for other things outside of the podcast, and we're coming up with them. And this is one of those events. So
in general too, people have not only asked for training, but also opportunity for more in-person interaction. And so that's all kind of what led to prompt this. But yeah, on March 8th, Marcus and I are going to co-host a day-long workshop near Birmingham, Alabama. And it's going to cover basically everything that we've covered on this podcast relative to what landowners can do to improve turkey habitat. We're going to cover all those bits and pieces, but what I'm most excited about is that this presents an opportunity for us to do that over the course of a full day, so we can give them a very comprehensive picture of how this all fits together, right? Because you can listen to everything that we're going to talk about in one or more of our episodes that we've put out. We want to provide that information freely to people, but this provides us an opportunity to present it in a very comprehensive way, so that landowners can better assimilate that information into the management of their property. And we'll also share some examples of how we've set up properties on that as well, to give them some ideas and prompts.
Right. And I was going to say another thing that I think is really valuable, which we're getting better. If you're not listening to this on YouTube and you're one that wants some more visuals, we are cutting more of it in. So go, start watching us on YouTube if you're interested in that. But that's one of the things that I think is just going to be valuable, is it's a comprehensive, storyline, for lack of a better term. Like we can walk people through stuff, and we also have the visuals from a lot of our research and work with private landowners across the South,
right?
Where we can show people, the how
responses,
the practices, what they're supposed to look like, what we did, how we put them together in property design, and to try to maximize productivity in the turkey population, but also set it up for huntability at the same time. So I'm really excited to be able to kind of put that together visually, for people as well.
And I think the other powerful aspect about, doing an in-person training is it provides them with the opportunity to ask questions that are specific to their property and their scenario and situation.
Yeah, and that's another thing due to popular demand. We're going to take some time, set aside time that's just more like Q&A, where we can just have conversations with people.
Right.
To talk through this stuff and answer questions and that sort of thing.
Yep. So we're partnering with Wildlife Investments on that, which is primarily a consulting group that we both work with, and they're enabling us to provide this opportunity and helping us set a lot of the logistics up on that. And it is going to be a little bit of money, but I mean, if you go on there and you look at it and see the list of topics that we plan to cover, I feel like it's a pretty good value for what they're asking on that. And I mean, specifically, we're going to cover, forest management for turkeys, and that's both hardwood and pine. We're going to talk about field management, including, managing for brooding cover, food plots, how to incorporate brooding cover into food plots, because I know a lot of landowners have to dual purpose those areas. We're going to talk about predation and predator management. We're going to talk about using prescribed fire and all the different objectives related to turkeys that you might want to try to achieve with prescribed fire. And we'll talk about season and frequency and to accomplish those different objectives. And then herbicides as well, for the same reason, shaping vegetation communities. And then, throughout that, forest stand improvement. And then throughout all of that, I think, one of my major objectives of doing this is to help filter it through a context that allows landowners to prioritize which of those action items need to be implemented first on their property to elicit the greatest bang for your buck, so to speak, in improving turkey populations.
Yeah, I agree. And to kind of round that out, I mean, some of the stuff that we'll talk about is more biological, like what do turkeys need at different life stages, which we get asked questions about that constantly. So we'll have that incorporated, and then having all of this cohesion between topics, I think could be really helpful. And then showing people examples of how we would put it together.
Right.
I think that's pretty powerful to help folks do that on their own.
Yep. I hope so. I hope it helps a lot of folks out.
Well, hopefully enough people want to do it to make it, make it a success.
Yeah.
And if that happens, then I think we will start to plan more of them in more places.
Yeah. And then some with probably some field component to it as well. Some demonstration work.
We've definitely gotten a fair amount of requests for something akin to like a Deer Steward 2 course for folks that have been through the Deer Steward program. We get asked to do stuff like that, but it's a challenge to put all that together, from our time standpoint and financially and all those sorts of things that go into it. And, I think if there's enough demand for it, then we'll make it happen, because ultimately I think that's where, a lot of our advocacy, to bring it back to our topic of the day, a lot of that comes from understanding what to do and how to do it, and then going and applying it, getting it on the ground, and letting that become, a center to promote positive change on the landscape.
Absolutely. Keep those turkey factories going.
Yeah. And we'll just keep increasing the size of those turkey factories and how many turkeys are output from those factories.
There we go.
If we can pull on all those strings, I think we're doing pretty good.
We want to create so many turkeys that every state's having nuisance turkey complaints.
Yeah. How do we get that problem?
I don't think Alabama and Mississippi are ever going to have that problem.
Yeah, probably not.
There's not a turkey in either one of those states that gobbles that doesn't get hunted.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, just sort of facetiously, but it may be true, is no better way to get the non-hunting community behind hunting than putting a big old gobbler on their hood.
Once they got a gobbler beating up on Fluffy, they may reconsider their stance.
And once a gobbler runs down Timmy, they get behind hunting.
Or their Amazon packages can't make it to the porch because the mailman's getting spurred.
Yeah, I saw a video recently. Did you see that?
No.
Somebody posted it on Instagram. It originated on TikTok, I think, but it was like a door cam of a delivery guy.
Yeah.
And he comes in and puts the package down, and he goes back, and these two turkeys come strutting in. And then he has
a couple of bullies.
Yeah, like they're about to whip him.
I wouldn't mind that problem.
Yeah. That is not a problem around my house.
Yeah. I think if that happened to me, I'd say I'm your huckleberry.
Yeah, let's have this showdown right here.
All right, we digress.
Yeah. Well, it's good stuff. I don't think that was exhaustive of all the ways. Certainly, there's other ways that you can advocate, but I think it's more important just to bring that topic into the forefront and, get folks thinking about that when we're kind of wrapping up for turkey season. Think about, are you an advocate, and what are ways that you can become one or become a better one? And we certainly are thinking about that from our perspective. So I know I've got plenty of ways that I can do better.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, I guess we'll call it good.
All right. Appreciate y'all.
Yeah, we'll link everything in the show notes that we talked about. If you guys are interested in the training, it'll be linked there. Appreciate all the support from everybody. If you hadn't had a chance, leave us some feedback.
Yeah. And if you watch on YouTube, you can see Marcus mixing his blue polo shirt with some bottomland today.
Yeah.
So who would want to
Hey,
miss
this
out on
is my
that?
jacket. It was cold in Florida today. This is my jacket. I wear it all the time as a jacket.
Dude, this is our third day in a row of being shut down due to weather, and I think we might still be shut down tomorrow.
Dang.
Yeah. Stick
No,
around.
it's not good.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.